Well, good morning. Good morning. Welcome to worship on this really cool, cold morning. But it is here with warm hearts that we gather, so welcome. I'm asking anyone who might have a quick, enthusiastic announcement if they would make their way forward while I give my quick, enthusiastic announcement. How many of you opened up your weekend paper and this bounced out at you? It was just like it hit me in the face. There it is, an article about the 23 to 0 project that we took on during the community Christmas dinner. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I'll leave the paper up here, maybe you can look at it. So that's my quick, enthusiastic announcement. Any others? Somebody need to lift something up this morning? Well, you can look at your bulletin for, here we go.
Could I just make one more appeal for newspapers for Day Activity Center? Deb Polk told you about it last Sunday. The box is in the coat room. I'm going to speak to her and ask her if we can use it instead, right up by the wheelchair where you come in the door and drop them. The Day Activity Center's been asking for them for more than a year now. And I'm trying to get the same drive going over at our 46-unit apartment building. If any of you live in a place where you can collect more, it would be wonderful because it's an activity for the adults at daycare. So please save papers. Don't save the ads, the booklets, the slick ads. Just the newsprint, sports and front section, and classified.
Don't be slick. Get your newspapers in. Yes, and I think she said last week that maybe they do 14 a week or something now, where they used to do 40 some or something to that effect. But yes, save your newspapers. Instead of sticking them in the recycle, bring them here, and we'll recycle them out at the Day Activity Center. Let's stand together as we join responsively in our call to worship. In the midst of a world where people hunger and thirst. In the midst of a world where people are abused and oppressed. In the midst of a world filled with wars and rumor of war. In the midst of a world of spiritual emptiness. Come worship a God whose grace and love know no end. Let's join together as we sing, Gather Us In. You opening prayer. God of life, you are as near to us as our breath. Touch our eyes that we may see you in one another. Open our ears that we may hear your voice in the cries of the oppressed. Enter our hearts that we may be filled with your love toward all creation. Come, God of life and breath and wholeness, be with us now. Show us the way to new life and grant us the courage to be people of your love. Amen. You may be seated.
So there are times when we get a request for a song, and we usually like to try to honor those requests. And so a while ago, Irene Eiler asked us to sing Put Your Hand in the Hand. So we thought we would do that, and we want you to come up and join us and sing the chorus with us, because I know you know it. Irene, can you come up?
I get in trouble quite often.
It's good trouble.
Put your hand in the hand of the man who stills the water. Put your hand in the hand of the man who calms page for you this morning. So if you just come down here and sit right up on the steps, that would be great. Oh, she's not behind us over here this time.
We're going to treat everybody as kids today, since we have a few kids. This is a book that Alan Page and his daughter Cammie wrote. And they've written several children's books. We had them at the library in the past year and a half, and Alan came and signed books. And I think it's quite appropriate today because we had Martin Luther King Day, and you probably remember the school was off that day. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful picture book. Plus, Alan Page is pretty famous in Minnesota. He was a Supreme Court judge. He was a Vikings football player. So the Super Bowl is coming up, so this is kind of appropriate. Alan Page has big hands. His scarred fingers twist and turn from tackles made and touchdowns prevented when playing football for the Minnesota Vikings. His palms are calloused from the years of gripping his gavel on the bench as a state Supreme Court justice. Though his hands may not look soft, Alan's grandchildren don't seem to mind when he snuggles up with them to read a story or gently wipe away a tear. But the most curious thing about Alan's hands is his perfectly pointy, impossibly perpendicular pinky. Today, as Alan looked at his hands while tying his favorite bow tie, he always wore a purple bow tie, he thought about his plans for the morning. You see, Alan loves to spend time talking with and reading to young children, and today was a special day. He was heading back to Market Elementary School, here where he first learned to read and write. Market Elementary was buzzing with excitement. Teachers had been planning Justice Page's visit for weeks. What an honor to have a visit from his honor, they gushed. How special, they fawned as they tidied up their rooms. Make sure you mind your manners and no interrupting, they reminded the students. Parents were invited, and they were just as excited as the students and teachers. I grew up watching him on TV, they told their children as they showed them old football cards and jerseys. He's in the Hall of Fame, they beamed. Be polite and make sure you raise your hand, they reminded their children one last time. When Alan arrived, he whisked into the classroom. The students quietly giggled as they watched him lower his towering body onto one of their teeny tiny chairs. The gentle bass of Alan's voice carried through the classroom as he began to read. The students leaned forward as they listened to this big man on a tiny chair. All eyes in the classroom were on Alan. All that is, except one pair of little boy eyes. Booker spotted the perfectly pointy, impossibly perpendicular pinky the moment Alan walked into the classroom and waved. The teachers, parents, and other students also noticed and were curious, but Booker was transfixed. He knew it would be impolite to ask about it. He knew it was impolite to stare. He knew that he was supposed to sit quietly and listen to Justice Page read. He knew he should just ignore the perfectly pointy, impossibly perpendicular pinky. But his eyes followed the pinky as though it were a magic wand coming out of the side of the book. Booker shifted. His knees bounced up and down. He sat up straight. He squirmed. He tried to raise his hand, but he just couldn't hold on to his question any longer. Booker erupted. What happened to your pinky? All eyes turned. It was Booker, of course. Booker had a knack for asking inappropriate questions and at inappropriate times. The teacher's eyes narrowed. Booker. The parents' eyes rolled. Booker. The student's eyes widened. Booker. Alan's eyes softened. Good question, Booker. Holding up his left hand, Alan asked, "You mean my perfectly pointy, impossibly perpendicular pinky?" Alan patiently explained how after years of dislocating his pinky, it eventually stopped working. In the same way that Booker couldn't hold on to his question, the pinky couldn't hold itself straight anymore. "Does it hurt?" Hazel asked. "No," Alan answered. "Aren't you mad?" Felix asked. "No," Alan said. "Why don't you fix it?" Ivy asked. Alan thought about Ivy's question. "It doesn't get in the way," he explained. "It snags on my shirt sleeve when I'm getting dressed. It doesn't cooperate when I put on a glove. And typing on a keyboard can be tricky. But there is one benefit to having a perfectly pointy, impossibly perpendicular pinky," he hinted. Minds raced as everyone tried to figure out what could come from having a perfectly pointy, impossibly perpendicular pinky. No one could think of anything. No one, that is, except Booker. "I know," Booker shouted. All eyes turned toward Booker again. The teacher's eyes narrowed. The parents' eyes rolled. The students' eyes widened. Everyone held their breath, waiting for Booker to speak. But Booker didn't speak. He simply grabbed the handlebars of an imaginary bicycle and stuck out his little pinky as far left as he could. Alan smiled. "Booker's got it. You all know about bike safety, right?" Grabbing his own imaginary handlebars and popping out his perfectly pointy, impossibly perpendicular pinky, he continued, "It makes a really good left-hand signal." When his visit was over, Alan waved goodbye. Booker was right up front, giving his own special wave back. Remembering himself as a student, Alan gave one last little wave with his perfectly pointy, impossibly perpendicular pinky. Booker smiled. And at the library, he definitely does have a very perpendicular pinky.
Oh, yeah, Sunday school and crafts and everything. That'd be fun. We're going to take some time to share our prayers and concerns for folks. And just a reminder that yesterday was the funeral for Karen Hopley's mom's funeral. So keep the Kathleen Lang family in your prayers. Are there some others you'd like to lift up this morning?
My friend Connie from work, with breast cancer returning, and it starts to roll.
Did you say Dottie? Dottie? So he'll keep Connie in your prayers, just prayers of healing and comfort and peace for her as her cancer has returned. Any others that you'd like to lift up this morning?
Let's see, Catherine Williams, our secretary.
Catherine Williams, our secretary, her cancer has also returned. And just Thanksgiving for those folks that kind of help her out and take over in the office. Ron?
Prayers for Thanksgiving. My friend who lost his leg in the horse this spring came to work yesterday on his new leg.
Yay, and he's with his new leg too.
New leg.
What was his name again?
Oh,
Tony? Okay, Tony. Prayers of thanksgiving. Any others?
Steve Weehoff will have his last treatment down in Mesa this next week.
Okay, his last one. Well, let's take some time to join in this litany of confession. Dear Lord, if we have hallowed you as our Father in heaven and have cut ourselves off from you and one another, if we have prayed for your kingdom to come and have bogged down by our own concerns,
Lord, have mercy on us. Christ, have mercy on us.
if we have prayed for your will to be done and have schemed and acted in our own ways, if we have prayed for our daily bread and have succumbed to the economics of consumerism,
Lord, have mercy on us. Christ, have mercy on us.
if we have sought forgiveness for our sin from you and have not had the grace to forgive others, if we have prayed to overcome temptation and have not trusted in the strength of your love,
Lord, have mercy on us. Christ, have mercy on us.
if we have prayed for deliverance from evil and have not risked an unpopular witness to stand against the structures of evil and iniquity, if we have prayed for your kingdom, power, and glory, and have chosen instead lesser gods we have manufactured,
Lord, have mercy on us. Christ, have mercy on us.
let's pray. Lord, hear our prayers of intercession and healing, and especially we lift before you Connie as her cancer has returned. Catherine also dealing with cancer issues. And also with our friend Steve Tweehoff as he goes through his last chemotherapy. Lord, it's just if one suffers, then our whole body suffers. So we lift those before you, Lord, that are suffering because of illness or injury, and ask that you would bring comfort and care to them. We pray that those who are suffering because they feel isolated by loneliness or just the absence of a loved one, we ask that you bring them reassurance and friendship. Also, those who are suffering because of exclusion or injustice or persecution, we ask that you would bring change and wholeness in their lives. Lord, we are your body here on earth, and we pray that we can respond in love and service. And we just ask that you accept our thanksgiving with those who rejoice. And we rejoice today with Tony as he probably celebrates coming back to work, but coming back to work in a new way. We thank you for that. And Lord, we just pray that you will unfold into your eternal life those who have passed away. And we lift before you Kathleen Lang this morning. Lord, the scripture from Isaiah's scroll was not new to the people gathered on that day for worship. They'd heard those words in their hearts, but Lord, none of them moved forward to do anything about it. And then Jesus proclaimed that God had called him to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And how they were startled. God, you have fulfilled that promise in the person of Jesus, the promise of hope and justice in this world. And we, your people, we have become bearers of that promise. And so, Lord, get us ready. Pick us up, dust us off, and put us on the pathways of justice. It's in Jesus' name that we offer this prayer, the prayer he taught us as we pray together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. At this time, I'll call Lois Christian as she gives us the service of remembrance.
Today I picked some words from Paul's farewell speech to the elders at Ephesus, and I think this will describe some of our women that I'm talking about today. I have not coveted anyone's silver or gold or clothing. You yourselves know that with these hands of mine I have worked and provided everything that my companions and I have needed. I have shown you in all things that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak. Remember the words that Jesus himself said, there is more happiness in giving than in receiving. Now when I say that these women didn't care about clothing, they certainly were neatly dressed, always appropriately dressed and up to date, and usually used color to express their joy. They all had careers in service because they truly cared about people. As Paul said, he earned to provide for the things he and his companions needed. They prepared themselves with proper education, some even with coping with health issues. They were not obsessed with working for acclamation or awards, but the thank yous that come with a job well done. They all had another occupation that was very, very dear to them, wife and mom. All raised amazing adults, assets to our community, providing all the talents that brought them so much respect. Once when visiting Beth, Dean was reminding us, or reminiscing about when at school, his mother had to be called Mrs. Wolf. Later, Suzanne said that didn't bother her. It was if they forgot to call her mother at home that really hurt. They have certainly brought to life Paul's words. There's more happiness in giving than receiving. These women all touched my life over the years, but I will not lengthen this by including my feelings. I'm sure you all have special memories of these true ladies. It has been difficult to put these lives into a few sentences. But they will start with Gail Reinecke, as she's the first one that left us about a year ago. When she was adopted by the Andersons, and I don't know what her heritage was then, but she embraced their Scandinavian heritage. Serving delicious samples at Circle, she obtained her nursing education at Hamlin Ashbury School of Nursing. When she and Weldon met, they were both patients at Cannon Falls TB Sanitarium, where they just considered this a bump in the road on the way to the rest of their life. A life of service, not an end. They raised 3 children. Gail returned to nursing when they got to school age. Gail had a Santa collection, many of which she obtained on travels and would share the stories of how she got them. In memory of Gail receiving red roses on many of her very special occasions, I have used red candles today. The next one that left us was Beth Wolf, born in St. Paul and graduated with a 2-year teaching degree. Founded the first kindergarten in Stewartville, married Woodrow Wolf, a nurse strand farmer. They were parents of 3 children, 2 teachers and a minister. She continued her education at Mankato State when it was a teacher's college. When they moved to Faribault, she taught at Jefferson. through to retirement. She got in on computers at the very beginning and did a lot of work on them, but she could not order from it as she didn't have a credit card. So she got all these things from many catalogs that she had. And when you went to her home, you always went home with something in your hand. It was always a treat to see her collection of creches, Norman Rockwell, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Charles Schultz, and the Diane Quints. Music was part of her life, singing groups, and she always led us in singing Grace whenever we had a meal. Sandy Smith was born in Kenyon and graduated from Faribault High School. She married George Smith. They raised 3 children. She served the community by being employed at Temple, Control Data, and Lincoln School. Volunteered at church, VFW, and American Legion Auxiliaries, hospice, and the hospital. We realized while putting the fourth teller together for mailing how well she knew George's post office job, and she had a smile that always put you at ease. And only one day apart, Shirley Kaiser left us. She started life in Kansas City, Missouri, or was it Missouri? Attended several colleges and universities, receiving a master's degree in social work. She married a Navy doctor and went on to private practice, and that had to be a career in itself. She raised 2 children, and after Dr. Cyril's death, she returned to working in social services. She married Mike Kaiser and volunteered in many, many community organizations and at our church. Darlene Ulrich was born in Otana and graduated from Otana High. She married Earl. They raised 2 children. Darlene's mother had worked in a bakery, and Darlene seemed to have the special talent to see that people were fed and supplies were stored up to make sure they were available. She worked at the clinic as an LPN for 44 years. That had to be a true service when people came in sick and apprehensive. She did this even as she dealt with some of her own health issues, and she took care of Earl in illness. And I can remember her asking for prayers for family members. Her last wish was to be an organ donor. And now I have to tell you, it's happened to me again. As I have experienced before, I find after someone has left us that I just did not have the privilege of knowing them, and I feel gypped. So I asked Carol Christie's daughter to just give me a little bit of her life so that we can know about it, because she had to be a wonderful person. She moved to Minnesota from Myrtle, South Dakota, where she spent most of her life. She was a Tupperware lady for over 35 years before becoming the deputy clerk of courts for James County. She was active in her home church, the American Legion Auxiliary, and she enjoyed reading and helping others and spending time with her family. I'll try and light the candles.
Thank you, Lois, for honoring these women. It's a privilege of the United Methodist Women to offer special memberships, and Kirsten will bless us with that time.
As you know, special memberships are given in honor of people who have served the church, and it's the women's way of recognize your service to the church. There's a gift that's given to mission through UMW, and most every year we've given at least 2 pins. And this year we have 2 people who will be receiving pins. They serve our church very diligently and very lovingly. They are quite often found in the kitchen. Not only do they cook, but they clean up. They've served on trustees and on finance and probably on other things that I don't know. But I'd like to present pins to Jack and Jackie Ledke. Jack, will you come up, please? Jack is not with us this morning, but I think Jack will take her pin to him.
A reading from the Old Testament from the book of Isaiah. Our courts oppose the righteous, and justice is nowhere to be found. Truth stumbles in the streets, and honesty has been outlawed. Yes, truth is gone, and anyone who renounces evil is attacked. The Lord looked and was displeased to find there was no justice. He was amazed to see that no one intervened to help the oppressed. So he himself stepped in to save them with his strong arm, and his justice sustained him. A reading from the Old Testament from the book of Micah. Know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Here ends the reading of the scriptures.
We're going to stand as we sing There's a Wideness in God's Mercy. This is one of my favorite songs. And the very first time that I sang it, the bulletin had a misprint. It said there's a wildness in God's mercy. I love that. So when I sing it, I always go, there's a wildness in God's mercy. But let's sing that together. Wildness.
Mercy, like the
interim at the Blooming Grove Waterville churches a couple of winters ago or years ago, and there was this guy who was always at the church in Blooming Grove, usually holding his baby granddaughter. And he would always say something to me very proudly about his wife being away, and she was away and away and away. And so she just kind of became this elusive person. And then a few weeks later, here she came. Here was the elusive Cindy. Well, when I finally met her and heard about what she was doing, I see why her family was so proud of her. Now, she told me not to use the whole bio, so I didn't. I'll just let her tell. But I see somebody put it in the bulletin. I didn't do that, Cindy. Somebody else did. But she is serving as the National Secretary for the Board of Directors of the United Methodist Women. That just takes her, all of her positions, the things she does, takes her all over the world. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because at home on the farm, her United Methodist service continues through our United Methodist Conference, along with farm chores and entertaining family and playing with grandchildren. So welcome, Cindy, as she brings a message today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'll tell you, it is really a privilege to be here with you, to worship this morning. And it really, when I walked into this space today, it brought back so many memories. I had to really think hard, but I think it was 20 years ago or so, I actually had my very first serious Bible study, right back over there in that church library. I joined a small group in a disciple Bible study. And as I came in, there were so many familiar faces, and so thank you for having me here today. And so, seeing that there was no one, and astonished that no one would intervene, God's arm brought victory, upheld by righteousness. So 6, maybe 7 years ago, something happened to me that was just completely out of the realm of possibility for me. And it placed me in situations that I could have imagined. I was elected to the board of directors for the United Methodist Women. And this little voice in my head, this conversation started. And it said, how did this happen? I'm just a farmer. The work and responsibilities began, and I found myself sitting in a room listening to indigenous women leaders from all over the world. They were discussing the plight of their communities, and they were working together for solutions. Do they know I'm just a grandma? There I was, sitting on the floor of the General Assembly Hall at the United Nations for the Commission of the Status of Women. Seriously, what am I doing here? Do they know what they've done? I'm just a small town girl. And I often describe myself this way, not feeling really worthy of the job or the position. And one day I was walking down the street and a friend of mine just looked at me and just said, quit using that word just. And then she was done. That's all she said. And this got me thinking. This is, what was I really saying when I used that word? When I described myself as just a farmer, not just a grandma. What was I doing? So being me, I pulled out the dictionary. And yes, I admit it, I do look up 4-letter words in the dictionary. And I looked up just and what it said. And it said merely or only. And by using just in this manner, it diminished who I was. It diminishes who we are. And it dismisses our power. And it absolves us of responsibility. So do you do this? Do you ever describe yourself this way? Do you ever say, I'm just the cook. I'm just whatever it might be. Do you think or say, I can't because I'm just? Are you giving your power away? Seeing that there was no one and astonished that no one would intervene, have we dismissed ourselves from responsibility? Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, he's a 20th century religious intellect, once said, in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. So back to the dictionary. And as you know, there's always more than one definition. And the second one says, based on or behaving accordingly to what is morally right or fair. I am a just person. We are a just church. Now, did you see the power of that one letter word, the letter A? And what happens if I put I am just A, and I moved it in front and said, I am a just person. Our words have power. And if we are not careful, they can relieve us of that power. So this next story, all good stories start this way. And it was a dark and stormy night. And it was in 1869 when the wives of two missionaries spoke to a small group of Methodist women in Boston. Now they shared how in India only women had access to women, meaning that adequate medical care or education was not available. So they started saving their pennies over and beyond what they had to give to the church, and that fall, they sent two women missionaries to India, Dr. Clara Swain and Isabella Thoburn. And 150 years later, there is a hospital and a college bearing these women's names, still serving women of India. And on March 23rd of this year, United Methodist Women will be 150 years old. Well, this was not a story of just a few women. This is a story of just women who saw a need and claimed their power as disciples of Jesus Christ to address it. Last May, United Methodist Women had assembly. Now, assembly is a gathering that happens every 4 years. And several thousand women gather from all over the world. It is the largest United Methodist gathering that there is. And they gather to learn about the needs of women, children, and youth in the 21st century. But this year it was in Columbus, Ohio. And there was a reason we placed it. It wasn't the first time it was in Columbus, it was the second. And the first assembly of the Women's Society of Christian Service and Wesleyan Service Guild, it was scheduled for May of 1942, their very first assembly. And it was supposed to be in St. Louis, Missouri. And at that time, there was no city in the nation where all the hotels were open to people of color without question. A few cities had one or two hotels that were open, but in St. Louis, that was not one of them. And originally, housing of the assembly had been carefully planned to have the white members stay in the hotel and the colored women to stay in the homes of the people. However, it was at a meeting in 1941 that the executive committee of the division had a recommendation to make. And what they said was, the Department of Christian Social Relations and Local Church Activities believes that the Christian church should lead the way in strengthening the working ideal of democracy in our nation. And so for these reasons, the department drew up the following resolution. And they said, number one, the church shall stand against discrimination. Number two, due to conditions permitting segregation in housing of the members in the hotels, we are unable to resolve this matter in St. Louis. And so three, we're going to seek another place for the meeting where segregation of membership will not be necessary. And 4, we will create a policy for the future that will not conflict with the Christian ideals of democracy. And 5, recommends that we seek cooperation with other denominations and organizations in making a united impact against discrimination in housing facilities for national needs. The recommendation failed to pass. Undaunted, though, I love that word, undaunted. It said the Women's Division set its own policy stating that the division holds its meetings only in those places where all members of its group can be entertained without any form of racial discrimination. The division was also able to find an alternate site for its 1942 assembly to be held in Columbus, Ohio, which had one hotel that would accommodate an integrated group. So in 1944, the division, when I say the division, I'm talking about the Division of Women. It was part of another agency. And they called upon the General Conference of the church to adopt their policy. The General Conference turned down the action, but still undaunted. The division remained firm in its conviction, and it proceeded to schedule all of their meetings accordingly. And in doing so, by 1946, 3 hotels in Columbus became fully integrated, and they were able to change the policy in a major New York City hotel and a famous resort in the Poconos. Now, this is a story of justice in the face of adversity. This is the story of United Methodist Women. That's the story of these candles lit right here. Seeing that there was no one and astonished that no one would intervene, God's arm brought victory, upheld by righteousness. So this past 6 years serving with United Methodist Women, I have found that the core of my work has been focused on racial justice, whether it's with the Acts of Repentance Working Group and building relationships with indigenous groups, or the eliminating of institutional racism, or the Charter for Racial Justice Committee. It isn't easy work. I find myself many times feeling inadequate and not having the answers. But the importance of the work and my place in it really didn't become clear to me until late one evening in Nashville. A group of us had just finished one of our meetings and everybody had left except Clara, Esther, and myself. I was gathering my things, my mind thinking about bed, when Clara began in her very quiet voice to speak. I quickly realized what she was saying, so I sat down and I listened. Clara was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, and as a young adult moved to Alabama. She began telling me what life was like as a little black girl living in the South in the 50s. She spoke about her anger as a young person as she dealt with blatant discrimination, segregation, and language. Hate language. And she began to tell me of the events of April 4th, 1968, that she had traveled to Memphis to protest. She spoke about getting out of a car at the Lorraine Motel and looking up to see Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the balcony speaking with people on the ground. She told me of the sound she heard, like an engine backfiring, and then seeing Dr. King falling. She talked about rushing to his side, loosening his belt, trying to stop the bleeding, saying that there was just so much blood. We sat in silence. We sat with her pain. A little bit later that year, I learned about an opportunity to join with the Wisconsin Council of Churches to ride a bus to Washington, D.C. to attend a rally against racism, which was on April 4th. It was going to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. I really hemmed and hawed. I mean, I was thinking I should go, but I mean, it was a 4-hour drive just to meet the bus. It was another 18 hours to Washington, D.C. It was all day standing outside and then the retreat trip home. I had all the excuses. I mean, riding a bus for that long, I'm not that young anymore. My back would hurt. I'd be so tired. It was excuse after excuse. And then God reached out and tapped me on the back of the head. He does that every once in a while. Clara texted me. She was sharing with me about the interviews that she was doing with NBC, with CNN, and USA Today, and was asking for prayers. Now I'm going to stop there for just a minute. I want you to think about this. This was the first time Clara had ever been interviewed. This African-American woman who witnessed and was at the side of Martin Luther King Jr. It took 50 years for them to go and ask to hear her voice. But it did. Last year, they were interviewing her. And she called and asked for prayers. I thought about her story and about her life. How her lived experience was so different than my own. All of a sudden, 3 days on the bus, it didn't seem so bad. Because it would never compare to the pain she had lived her whole life. So I went. I listened to leaders from many, many faith traditions speaking to the issues of racism. How we are called to carry on the work which was started by Martin Luther King Jr. over 50 years ago. I witnessed the fruition of the United Methodist Women's call for all churches to collaborate in this work against racism. Nearly 75 years later. 75 years later, we are still fighting this battle. The trip was difficult, but it wasn't my physical discomfort that was really the issue. It was that revisiting of those blind spots within my own white privilege. I think I'm a good person. I don't use derogatory terms. I have many friends of color. But privilege is really a strange thing, in that you notice at least when you have it the most. It's like, I am never more grateful for my health until I'm sick. Or you just don't know what you have until it's gone. But with the color of our skin, we only get to experience what we've got, and racism is much deeper than our skin. I have so much to learn, and there's still so much more work to do. But seeing that there was no one and astonished that no one would intervene, God's arm brought victory upheld by righteousness. The prophet Isaiah is really trying to tell us something very important here. This God who spoke creation into being and said it is good, this parent of humanity can't stand to see the suffering of God's children, all of God's children. This God, our God, needs us to live justly, not to dismiss ourselves, but to step up to alleviate all the suffering of all God's children. So what exactly does God's arm look like? Well, I'll tell you. It looks like you and me. God created us. All of us created us in God's image. We are the children of God. And I really don't think God created just a child. God has created each and every one of us as perfect reflections of a just God. regardless of race, sexual preference, or gender. We are to grow into the likeness of God, living into perfect love for all creation. So please, please, do not dismiss who you are or who your neighbor is. By doing so, you dismiss God. Amen.
Let's continue our worship as we ask the ushers to collect our offering. love.